Researcher Ju sat alone in the quiet lab, lit only by the soft blue glow of analysis screens and the occasional flicker from the artifact resting in his hand. The cylindrical device was cold, its surface etched with deep, precise symbols that didn't match any known language in the Concordium archives. Ju rotated it slowly between his four fingers, examining every line again for the 100th time. His colleagues had dismissed it. The council had ignored it. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this piece of metal told a truth no one wanted to believe. Humans. Human. The very word felt strange in his mind, almost like speaking a curse aloud. In Concordium culture, humans weren't history. They were legend, bedtime stories. Ancient myths whispered to younglings about a race of terrifying power and unmatched brilliance who ruled the stars long ago, before vanishing without a trace. Most people found the stories entertaining. No one ever took them seriously. But Ju wasn't most people. He'd spent over 20 years piecing together scraps, stray energy readings, old carvings, untranslatable texts, strange monoliths left on abandoned planets. The scientific community scoffed. The elders politely humored him. But this artifact, this was different. It wasn't speculation. It was solid proof. And yet, once again, he knew what Elder Duan would say if he brought it up. Again. Researcher Zhu, she had told him the last time, her tone gentle but firm. Humans are stories, nothing more. Next, you'll be telling us the Star Eaters are real too. Zhu clenched his jaw at the memory, skin flushing a darker shade of blue, a biological reaction to frustration. For 3 cycles now, he'd returned to the council with new evidence. And for 3 cycles, they had turned him away. But this wasn't like the others. This wasn't just theory. The artifact's material composition was unlike anything in the Concordium's known records. The power source, though dormant, emitted trace energy readings that didn't match any technology developed by their own civilization or by any of their known neighbors. Zhu had compared it against thousands of databases. Nothing came close. The truth was sitting in his hand. And still, no one wanted to see it. The lab's door slid open with a quiet hiss. Ju barely glanced up as his assistant, Mi, stepped in. Her movements rushed, her breathing shallow. Her membranes blinked rapidly, nervous. Very nervous. Another signal, she said quickly, placing a data crystal on his workstation. Detected on the edge of our space. Sector 7. Ju arched an eyebrow but said nothing. He took the crystal, slid it into the console. The holographic screen lit up, showing patterns of energy pulses mapped across space. They were symmetrical, intentional, clearly artificial. This is the 3rd signal this month, he said, enhancing the display. And they're getting closer. The council thinks it might be the Doran collective testing new comms, Mi offered. But her voice lacked conviction. Zhu scoffed. The Dorans can barely reach their own moons. These signals are coming from deep space. Far deeper than any Doran vessel could ever travel. He tapped the interface and overlaid the energy pattern with one he'd extracted from the artifact weeks ago. The two matched exactly. I stared, speechless. They're not tests, Zhu said. They're messages. And they're not from the Doran. She hesitated, then asked quietly, "You think it's humans?" Zhu didn't answer right away. He stepped back, looked at the display, then at the artifact still clutched in his hand. "The old stories spoke of a species unlike any other," he said, almost to himself. "They mastered technology beyond our understanding, built wonders that defied the laws of physics, fought wars that reshaped galaxies. Then, they disappeared." He turned to her. "But what if they didn't disappear? What if they just left?" Mi's skin shifted to a faint lavender, the Concordium sign of confusion. "Why would they leave?" "I don't know," Zhu admitted. "Maybe they saw something coming. Maybe they needed to prepare. Or maybe they didn't leave by choice." A long silence stretched between them. The idea was ridiculous, impossible, and yet there it was. Evidence, real, physical evidence. Mi checked her personal communicator. A new message flashed across the screen and her expression shifted to alarm. "The Science Council," she said, breathless. "They want to see you. Now, Elder Dawn personally requested your presence." Zhu blinked, surprised. After years of dismissal and ridicule, the council was calling on him? He placed the artifact into a secure container, his mind racing. "Maybe," he whispered. "They're finally ready to listen." The council chamber was more crowded than usual when Zhu arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. For years, the halls of Concordium Science had echoed with quiet certainty and polite dismissals. Now, everyone seemed to be whispering. Something had shifted. He stepped through the chamber's curved glass doors with Miai at his side, his secure container clutched tightly in one hand, the other holding the new data crystal. At the center of the room, Elder Duan sat in her elevated chair. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture lacked the ease Zhu was used to seeing. Surrounding her were not only fellow members of the Science Council, but high-ranking military officers as well. That alone told Zhu that something serious had happened. "Researcher Zhu," Elder Duan called out as he entered. "Please present your findings again." For a brief moment, he hesitated. After so many years of having doors closed in his face, the sudden invitation felt surreal. Still, he nodded respectfully and stepped forward. Mia connected the data crystal to the chamber's main interface, and the room darkened as holographic displays sprang to life above them. He began with the artifact, its material composition, its impossible energy readings, the symbols inscribed in unknown script, but then he shifted to something newer. "This," he said, gesturing to the newest set of data, "was recorded just hours ago on the edge of Sector 7. The display zoomed into a quiet, long-abandoned stretch of space. Bright pulses of energy began to appear, at first faint, then increasingly regular. They formed a pattern, too precise to be natural. This is the third such signal we've recorded in recent weeks," he explained. "Each one originating closer to our core systems. Each one sharing identical patterns to the artifact I recovered years ago." He tapped a control panel, overlaying the energy reading from the artifact onto the recent signals. The waveforms aligned perfectly. Several of the military officers exchanged looks. One leaned over to whisper something to another. "The patterns match," Elder Duan said slowly, her voice tight. "But that doesn't confirm the origin." "No," Zhu agreed, "but it proves the technology is related. And based on everything we've gathered, this technology isn't from any known civilization in our region of space. Not the Doreen Collective, not the Cinder Republic. No one we've encountered has demonstrated this level of precision in long-range signal design." One of the military officers, a broad, steel, gray-scaled admiral, stepped forward. "And who?" he asked. "Who is capable of this?" Zhu didn't answer immediately. He glanced at me, who nodded slightly. This was the moment. "I believe," Zhu said, his voice calm but resolute, "these signals were sent by humans." The room erupted into hushed murmurs and uneasy shifting. A few scoffed openly. Others looked stunned. Elder Duan held up a hand, quieting the room. "Explain," she said. "For 2 decades I've studied the legends," Zhu began, "not as folklore, but as fragments of historical memory shared across multiple species and systems. Stories of a race that once mastered faster-than-light communication, energy manipulation, gravitational control. Stories of fleets so advanced they were more like living beings than machines. Stories we laughed off." He paused, then gestured to the data in the air above them. "And yet, this signal, the one you all see here, matches those legends down to the mathematical structures embedded in the waveform. A structure so complex it shouldn't occur randomly, but it appears again and again in these transmissions." A long silence followed. Then Elder Duan spoke again, but not to Zhu. She turned to one of the military aides near the wall. "Show them the long-range footage." The aide nodded and opened a separate display. The room darkened further, and an image filled the space above them. It showed deep space, empty at first. Then, from the darkness, points of light emerged, 1, 2, 5, then dozens, then hundreds, slowly moving, keeping formation. Zhu felt his breath catch. Ships, he whispered. An entire fleet, the aide confirmed. Of unknown origin. Detected just past Sector 7 less than an hour ago. They haven't crossed into central space, but they're moving steadily inward. Elder Dawn turned to Zhu. Her expression was no longer skeptical. We believe, she said slowly. The signals were attempts to communicate. We've only just completed translation of the latest message. It came in through one of our deep-range relay satellites. The display shifted again, this time showing a single line of text written in archaic human script. But the Concordium translation floated beneath it. We are the United Earth Federation. Humanity has returned. Prepare for contact. The chamber went silent. Zhu stared at the words, then at the artifact he'd guarded for so long. His voice came quiet but firm. They were never myths. The legends were warnings. Admiral Kang Ho stood motionless on the command deck of Concordium Defense Station Aegis. His 4 eyes were locked on the main view screen, where hundreds of unidentified vessels drifted slowly into their sector. No hails, no warnings, just presence. His outer hands were clasped tightly behind his back, while his primary set rested with subtle tension on the command console. The crew around him worked in tense silence, heads bowed, eyes scanning displays for anything that could explain what they were seeing. Another 12 ships just appeared, the sensor officer reported, her voice barely above a whisper. That brings the total to 537, Admiral. Kang Ho didn't respond right away. In 60 years of service, he had lived through border skirmishes, full-scale war, and political standoffs that threatened to tear the galaxy apart. He had seen fleets maneuver with deadly intent and watched entire planets burn. But never had he witnessed anything like this. The fleet was massive, but it wasn't just the size that unsettled him. It was the way they moved. Perfect formation, unshifting discipline, not advancing, not retreating, just waiting. Magnify Section 4, Kang Ho ordered. The image zoomed in on one of the larger vessels. Its design was unlike anything in the Concordium database. Smooth, sleek plating with sharp angular ridges. Protrusions lined its undercarriage, possibly weapons, possibly sensors, no visible engine exhaust. And yet these ships had arrived with impossible speed. Strategic Officer Bina, he said. Do any of our records match this configuration? She ran a rapid scan, her scaled fingers flicking across her interface. No matches, Admiral. However, she paused. Speak freely, officer. The design elements resemble the artifacts researcher Zhu has been studying. The ones he claims are of human origin. The silence on the bridge deepened. The mention of humans being considered myth, legend, stories told to younglings was met with a mix of awe and unease. Send the greeting protocols, Kang Ho said firmly, though his voice was colder than usual. Lieutenant Yunji, the communications officer, activated the Concordium's first contact sequence. A series of mathematical equations, tonal signals, and universal visuals designed to reach across languages, across cultures. It had been used only twice in the past century. Both times, it had worked. They waited. Minutes passed. No response, Yunji reported. Her skin had turned a pale shade of blue, a stress reaction among their kind. Repeat the message, Kang Ho ordered. All frequencies. Include the emergency diplomatic codes. The bridge crew complied, tension mounting with every second of silence from the unknown fleet. Kang Ho opened a secure channel to Concordium Central Command. We are attempting communication, he reported. No response yet. The situation remains unchanged. Admiral, Yunji's voice cut through the air. Interrupting a military report was unthinkable, but her voice carried urgency. We're receiving a transmission. The screen flickered. The image of the alien fleet vanished. It was replaced by a face. 2 eyes. Smooth skin. Hair. A mouth. No scales. No secondary set of eyes. The crew stared, frozen. "This is Fleet Commander Han of the United Earth Federation," the being said. "After 5 centuries, humanity has returned to Concordium space." The translation was flawless, rendered instantly by the ship's systems. Yet even stripped of accent or intonation, the voice carried authority. Calm, controlled, confident. Kang Ho found his voice. "This is Admiral Kang Ho of the Concordium Defense Force. Your presence has caused considerable concern. Our records contain no verified information about your species." "That is unsurprising," Commander Han replied. "We withdrew from this region of space long before your civilization achieved starflight." "For what purpose have you returned?" Kang Ho asked carefully. Every word of this exchange was being broadcast live to Central Command. Han's expression didn't change. "We have been monitoring your development from afar. Your civilization has advanced rapidly, but you are not prepared for what approaches. We have returned to help you survive it." Kang Ho was about to ask what he meant, but an officer rushed onto the deck. "Admiral," she said breathlessly, holding out a datapad, "urgent update from the outer systems. Outpost 12 has gone silent. Last transmission described unknown biological entities, unlike anything we've ever encountered." Kang Ho read the report in silence, then slowly looked up at the human commander still visible on the screen. "I see you've received word of the first incursion," Han said. "We were too late to save that outpost, but we need not be too late for the other." The pieces were clicking into place. The signals, the artifact, the sudden reappearance of a forgotten civilization, none of it was coincidence. "You didn't come back for us," Kang Ho said slowly. "No," Han replied. "We came back because of what follows us. And now, it follows you too." A chill spread through the room. Every officer felt it. For centuries, humanity had been a myth, a forgotten chapter in someone else's history. But they hadn't vanished. They just stepped away, watching, waiting. And now, when it mattered most, they had returned. Not as conquerors, not as Sanker, but as a warning. The Grand Council Chamber of the Concordium had never hosted anything like this. 3 humans sat across from 7 of the most powerful figures in the known galaxy, leaders of science, military, and diplomacy. Their bodies were smaller than Concordians, their skin smooth, with only 2 arms, not 4. Yet there was nothing weak about them. Their eyes held the same depth, intelligence, and weariness of those who had seen war and survived it. Behind the council stood observers and aides, including researcher Zhu and his assistant Miai. After years of mockery and dismissal, Zhu now stood, recognized his artifact protected in a case beside him, the foundation of everything the council now confronted. "You abandoned your worlds," Councillor Chuno said, his voice calm but accusatory. "The historical ruins we've discovered on Veyros, on Taka Ruin, they were yours, and yet you've left them to decay?" The human in the center, an older woman with gray-streaked hair and sharp eyes, met his gaze with no sign of offense. "I am Ambassador January," she said evenly. "And yes, those ruins were once our homes. We did not abandon them willingly. We retreated to survive." "From what?" asked Councillor Taiwan, folding his upper arms. "Our scientists have found no evidence of natural catastrophe on any of your former worlds." January exchanged a glance with the 2 military officers seated beside her. Then she said, "It wasn't natural. It was something else, something we call the Void Eaters." A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. The name was unfamiliar, but it carried weight. "We believe," January continued, "that you've already encountered them. Outpost 12, correct? Your admiral said it went silent after reporting contact with unknown biological entity." Zhu felt a knot form in his chest. He'd read the report. The last transmission was garbled, panicked voices, strange sounds, and then silence. "You're saying this was the same threat that drove you into hiding?" Councillor Jimo asked skeptically. Before January could respond, Miai stepped forward, breaking protocol. Zhu tried to stop her, but she shook off his hand and stood straight. The monoliths in Sector 9, were they yours? She asked directly. January's expression shifted from diplomatic neutrality to something closer to surprise. Yes, she answered. What you call ancient wonders we call early warning systems. They're not decorative. They detect void activity. I activated a small projector and cast an image between the delegations. A massive black spire rising from the surface of a distant world. This is the monolith of Takaruan, she said. We've studied its energy output for years. It pulses every 73 days. Or, it did. 3 months ago, that changed. Now it pulses every 2 days. January's eyes narrowed. That confirms it. The Deep Watch network is still active. Deep Watch? Asked Jimo. Our long-range detection system, the human military officer replied. If the pulses are increasing, the void is moving. Ju stepped forward beside Mi. We thought it was a malfunction, he said quietly. We were wrong. The room fell into heavy silence. Finally, Ambassador January stood, her voice steady but grim. 5 centuries ago, we weren't ready. The void destroyed our colonies. Earth itself barely survived. We fled to the far side of the galaxy. We rebuilt. We waited. And when the monoliths began to pulse again, we knew it had returned. What is it? Counselor Taiwan asked. A species? A machine? It's a hunger, January said. It devours everything metal, energy, organic matter, even light. The void doesn't conquer. It consumes. Show us, ordered Chancellor Tan, who had remained mostly silent until now. The human officer beside January activated a projector. Above the table, holographic images began to play. Dark ships, organic and massive, moving through the stars like living storms. Their surfaces pulsed with energy. Tendrils extended from their bodies, tearing through starships and stations with horrifying ease. These ships are alive, asked Admiral Kang Ho, who had entered during the exchange. Ship, weapon, organism, all one entity, the officer said. They don't build. They grow. They don't fuel. They feed. Taiwan crossed his arms tightly. This could be a fabrication, a scare tactic to justify your return. Zhu stepped forward again, holding up a data pad. We compared your footage with the final moments from Outpost 12. He linked his pad to the central display. A new set of images appeared. Grainy, chaotic footage from the outpost's external cameras. Shadowed figures. Skeletal forms, something slithering, punching through hulls. Then, audio screams, clicking sounds, and one final chilling sentence. They're inside. They're eating everything. The chamber went cold. This is not exaggeration, Commander Han said. We've faced them before. We didn't defeat them. We barely survived. The void adapts, added January. Each time we engage, they evolve. New defenses. New strategies. I looked up from her console. Then our odds get worse with each encounter. Yes, January replied. Unless we act now. How long before they reach us? Counselor Taiwan asked. Based on the monolith signals and current losses, 2 months. Han said. Maybe less. Counselor Tan sat back, his expression tense. Do you believe we can stop them? Han didn't hesitate. I believe we have to try. And if we refuse your help? Tan asked. January didn't blink. Then you'll fight alone. And when you fall, we'll be next. Admiral Kang Ho placed all 4 hands on the table, a concordium symbol of formal decision. I move that we accept their proposal, he said. This threat is real. We need each other. One by one, the council members followed suit. At last, even Tan joined them. So be it, he said. Together then, we face the darkness. The Concordium Defense Station Vanguard had never seen this much activity. What was once a quiet military outpost on the edge of known space was now a bustling hub overflowing with joint task forces, engineers, scientists, and soldiers. Hallways echoed with rapid footsteps. Hangars buzzed with shuttles loading cargo, unloading equipment, refitting ships. Orders were shouted in multiple languages, and for the first time in history, the words were being understood. Lieutenant Yunji weaved through the chaos of the hangar bay, careful not to get clipped by a speeding equipment transport. Her uniform, once worn with quiet pride, now bore a new insignia on the shoulder, a symbol of cooperation, Concordium and human, side by side. As a communications officer under Admiral Kang Ho, she'd been assigned liaison duties to the human military advisors. It was supposed to be a temporary position. It had become something much more. She reached the edge of the training area. Just as a Concordium soldier, massive armored four-armed, was hurled to the mat by a human instructor half his size. Captain Suo, the human combat instructor, extended a hand to help the stunned Concordium trooper to his feet. The humans moved differently, quicker, more compact. Their tactics weren't based on brute strength. They didn't try to overpower. They adapted, redirected, exploited weakness. "You fight like your species evolved for war," Yunji said as Suo climbed the steps to the observation platform beside her. He shook his head, sweat glistening on his brow. "We evolved for survival," he corrected. "There's a difference." He took a long drink from a bottle and gestured out toward the training floor. "The Void doesn't fight like anything we've faced. It doesn't want territory. It doesn't want resources. It wants to feed. Everything: metal, energy, life, information. It consumes. That's it." Yunji frowned. "So how do you fight something like that?" "With adaptability," Suo replied. "Your military is disciplined, structured, well-equipped, but you train for predictable enemies. The Void doesn't follow rules." Across the hangar, teams of Concordium engineers worked beside human technicians to retrofit defense vessels with Earth-designed shielding. Others installed updated sensor arrays, scanning for faint Void signature. The alliance had officially been signed just 2 weeks earlier, and already 3 more outer systems had been lost. Yunji followed Suo's gaze as a new shuttle touched down in the bay. A team of human scientists emerged, flanked by Concordium security. In the center walked a small, elderly woman, white-haired, bent slightly with age, but with eyes that flicked across the bay, missing nothing. "That's Dr. Kim," Suo said quietly. "She's been studying the Void for 60 years. If anyone can figure out how to hurt them, it's her." Yunji and Suo moved to greet her. "Captain Suo," Dr. Kim said as they met near the shuttle. "How is the integration progressing?" "Faster than expected," Suo answered, "but not fast enough." He turned to Yunji. "Lieutenant Yunji is our Concordium liaison." Dr. Kim looked her over thoughtfully. "Good. I need access to all data from the recent Void encounters, especially the readings from just before contact was lost." "You'll have them," Yunji said. "Admiral Kang Ho authorized full information sharing." "Excellent," Kim said. "Because I've seen something in the new scans that's concerning." She tapped a control on her wrist device and projected a 3D model of a Void bioship. This one was different from previous records. It had structural additions, features that bore resemblance to Concordium technology. "They're adapting," she said. "Faster than we've seen before. Look here, these energy collectors along the hull. That's Concordium tech. They're learning from us while they consume us." Suo's face hardened. "Then we're running out of time." Before Yunji could reply, alarms blared across the station. Red lights flooded the hangar in an eerie glow. Officers shouted. Security scrambled to positions. "What's happening?" Dr. Kim asked, still calm. Yunji checked her communicator. "Void scouts detected in the Helios system. That's only 2 jumps from here." Suo didn't flinch. "Then we accelerate the deployment schedule." Dr. Kim nodded. "Standard timelines won't work anymore." A nearby view screen activated, showing Admiral Kang Ho's face. "All personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill. First wave of Void scouts has bypassed the outer grid. Evacuation protocols for civilian transports begin immediately." Yunji took a steadying breath. "Doctor, I'll escort you to the command center." They moved quickly, dodging technicians and soldiers. Outside the corridor viewport, the combined fleet was already mobilizing. Human ships and Concordium vessels moved together, perfectly synchronized. They had trained for this. They had prepared. But still, this would be their first real engagement together. "Do you think we'll be ready?" Yunji asked Suo as they ran beside each other down the corridor. "No," he said bluntly. "But we'll adapt. That's what we do." The station rumbled beneath their feet as it entered full combat readiness. The wars humanity had prepared for over centuries had finally arrived, and the void was no longer just a distant nightmare. It was here. The skies above New Serenity burned with the first light of war. Once hailed as the jewel of the Concordium inner colonies, the planet now stood as the final line before the core worlds. Its orbital defense platforms had fallen in the first wave. What remained of the Concordium fleet formed a desperate wall between the surface and the rapidly advancing Void Armada. From deep beneath the capital city, General Hainu watched the battlefield unfold across the tactical display in the war room. The room vibrated with tension. Reports streamed in lost ships, failing shields, dead silence from once active outposts. "Third defensive line is collapsed," one officer called out. "Fourth forming now," another added, "but our vessel count is down to 30%. "Where the hell are the reinforcements from Sector 7? Hainu demanded. "Destroyed or scattered," came the grim reply. "The Void bioships adapted to our phase cannons. They're useless now." 3 weeks of constant battle had bled the Concordium dry. Over half their navy was gone. The human forces had held up better, but they were spread too thin fighting on multiple fronts, buying time with lives. Hainu leaned over the display, scanning for the signature of the promised human reinforcements. "Nothing. You said Earth's fleet would support this position," he snapped at his tactical officer. "They confirmed 2 days ago," she replied. Their last transmission placed them in the Proxima sector. Before Hainu could reply, a junior comms officer rushed forward. "Encrypted message from the human flagship," she said, holding out a datapad. "Put it through," Hainu ordered. Commander Han's face appeared on the central display. Calm. Behind him, the human bridge flickered with lights and motion, but he spoke with focus and precision. "General, prepare your forces to advance on my mark." "Advance?" Hainu repeated, incredulous. "We're barely holding the line." "Trust me," Han replied. "When I give the signal, push forward with everything you have." "Target the coordinates I'm transmitting now." Data began streaming to the secondary display. Hainu stared at the highlighted area was behind the Void fleet. "There's nothing there." "There will be," Han said. "Stand by." The screen went dark. Hainu turned to his officers. "Prepare all remaining ships for full assault on those coordinates." "On my command." They didn't question him. There wasn't time. And truthfully, no one had a better plan. The Void ships pushed forward, towering organic monsters, some kilometers long, dripping with corrosive fluids and bristling with pulsing tendrils. They tore through Concordium cruisers, absorbing metal and matter into their living hull. The largest ship, once 3 separate Void entities, had merged mid-battle into a single behemoth, and it was moving directly toward the planet. 30 seconds until planetary shield failure, reported the officer at the defense station. And then they arrived. In a blaze of light, over 500 human vessels dropped out of hyperspace. Not at the system's edge, not in safe coordinates. They jumped directly into the battle. The war went silent. Tactical Officer G stared at her console, eyes wide. "They jumped inside a gravity well," she whispered. "That's impossible." "Humans," Hainu muttered. "They don't seem to care about impossible." The human fleet wasted no time. They opened fire with weapons no one in the Concordium had ever seen. Beams of golden energy high-frequency disruptors tore through Void bioships, slicing through regenerative tissue before it could reform. Smaller human strike ships darted in and out of the swarm, planting devices that pulsed with light before detonating. "They're using quantum destruction charges," said the weapons officer. "Those are theoretical in our research. They're deploying them live." Commander Han's voice returned to the room. "Now, General. Push forward." "All ships," Hainu barked. "Advance!" Concentrate fire on the designated coordinates." The Concordium fleet surged ahead, joining the attack from the opposite side. Together, the two forces encircled the void, pinning them between Earth's precision weapons and the Concordium's raw firepower. And for the first time, the void faltered. On the tactical display, Hinu noticed a shift in human strategy. Their ships weren't just destroying the void. They were guiding them, herding them toward a specific point in space. When the largest void vessel reached the center of that kill zone, Han's flagship fired a single projectile. It attached to the target silently. Nothing happened. Then space itself bent. A gravity well bloomed into existence, artificial, precise, and devastating. The singularity began pulling the massive bioship inward. It fought, shrieked across frequencies, extended tendrils, but there was no escape. "What is that?" Hinu asked, stunned. Ji stared at her console. "Artificial gravity field. But it's selective. It's only affecting the void bioship." All across the battlefield, similar devices were deployed. Dozens of mini-singularities formed and vanished, each one pulling a void ship into nothingness, ending them without a trace. Han's voice returned to the chamber. "Maintain distance from gravity fields. Containment is calibrated for void biology only." Within 20 minutes, the skies above New Serenity began to clear. The final bioship exploded in a flash of light, torn into fragments by converging fire. The battle was won, but it wasn't over. "We've cleared this sector," Han said, his voice grave. "But this was just their vanguard. The main fleet is 8 hours behind." Hinu turned to him. "You jumped into a gravity well. You deployed theoretical weapons. Why didn't you use them sooner?" Hain's face hardened. "Because we only get one shot. The void adapts fast. If they'd seen these weapons earlier, they'd already have countermeasures. Now they've seen them, we'll be lucky to use them once more." And then Hinu understood. Humanity hadn't just prepared for this war, they had gambled everything on timing, and the real fight hadn't even begun. 1 year had passed since the war ended, and the memorial garden stood in solemn quiet. Where once a bustling command center had managed battle after disparate battle, now a circular plaza of glass and stone lay beneath the open sky of New Serenity. The air was warm, the sun shone peacefully overhead, filtered through the crystal spires that ringed the garden. Around its edges, representatives from every major species stood in silence, military, scientific, political, and civilian, all gathered not in strategy or fear, but remembrance. In the center, a towering monument spiraled upward, 12 meters of polished metal and crystal, etched with names in both Concordium glyphs and human lettering. Millions of names. Too many names. Each one a life lost in the fight against the void. Ambassador January walked slowly to the monument's base, a small potted flower cradled in her arm. Her posture was slightly stooped, her hair almost entirely silver now, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. Behind her stood Commander Han, no longer in full military uniform, but a white diplomatic coat marked with the seal of the United Earth Federation. His presence still carried weight, calm, composed, but with less of the edge that war had carved into his features. January knelt and placed the flower, its small blue petals glowing faintly in the sunlight at the base of the monument. "Forget-me-not," she explained softly to the Concordium leaders nearby. "On Earth, we plant them to remember those we've lost." Chancellor Tan, once the fiercest skeptic of the humans, stepped forward. His ceremonial robe shimmered with both traditional Concordium symbols and a newly added sigil, an intertwined emblem of two species now forever linked. "A fitting tribute," he said, his voice carried through translation. "May we never forget the sacrifice that bought us our future." From the crowd, a Concordium child broke away from his parents and walked cautiously toward the humans. He couldn't have been more than 6 cycles old, his scales still carried the bright blue sheen of youth, and his 4 eyes blinked, not in fear, but curiosity. He looked up at Ambassador January. "The story said humans were giants," he said seriously, "and that they could breathe fire." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the gathering. January knelt, meeting the child's gaze at his level. "We're not giants," she said, smiling gently. "And no fire breathing, just people. Like you. Different. But the same in ways that matter." She reached behind the boy's ear and pulled a small coin, seemingly from nowhere. His eyes widened. He gasped. "Magic," he whispered. "Ancient Earth currency," January said, placing the coin into his palm. "For good luck." From nearby, researcher Zhu watched with a quiet smile. It still didn't feel real. Even now, the myths he'd studied his whole life had stepped out of the shadows and into history. The artifact he had once hidden in a drawer was now displayed in a museum. He stood beside Miai, who now wore the insignia of the Joint Scientific Council. She glanced at him, her tone playful but quiet. "Still hard to believe, isn't it? That humans were real all along," Zhu replied. "Or that we survived the void." "Both," she said. "But mostly that we're here planning a future instead of fighting for survival." Chancellor Tan approached them, nodding respectfully. "Your research was instrumental, Zhu," he said. "Without your persistence, we may have ignored the truth until it was too late." "I only followed the evidence," Zhu said modestly. "Evidence most of us refuse to see," added Admiral Kang Ho, stepping into the circle. His left arm, lost in the early weeks of the war, had been replaced with a prosthetic of Earth design. It functioned as smoothly as the real thing, and perhaps better. Pride is a dangerous thing. He looked toward January and gestured for her to join them. When she did, he turned to address her formally. "The new Galactic Charter is ready for signing," Kang Ho said. "Humanity will finally take its seat at the table, not as myths, but as friends." From the edge of the garden, Captain Suo and Lieutenant Yunji stood shoulder to shoulder. Once just soldiers, they now led the Joint Military Training Initiative, developing the next generation of defenders. The war had changed them both, not just in scars, but in purpose. "Do you think the void will return?" Yunji asked quietly. Suo didn't answer right away. "Maybe," he finally said. "But if they do, we'll be ready." Together, above them, the sky was filled with ships, human and Concordium alike, new designs built with shared technology. The final segments of the orbital defense platform glinted high above the planet, a marvel of engineering born from desperate necessity and hard-earned trust. In classrooms across New Serenity, younglings now learned the true history of humanity, not as terrifying giants, not as vanished gods, but as a people with triumphs and failures, just like anyone else. The ancient monoliths that once puzzled generations were now recognized for what they truly were: warnings, guardians, and legacies of a long battle fought in silence. As the ceremony reached its close, Ambassador January stepped up to the podium. The crowd fell into a deep stillness. "Today, we remember those we lost," she began, her voice clear. "But we also celebrate what we found each other. For centuries, we lived in the shadows of your stories. You spoke of us as giants, as monsters, as legends. As legend." She paused. "The truth, as always, is both simpler and more complicated. We are not gods. We are not saviors. We are simply travelers on the same long journey across the stars. And now, finally, we walk it together." A soft silence followed. Then, from the front, the same Concordium child raised his voice. "Will you tell us stories of Earth?" January left warm and real. "We have many to share," she said. "And we look forward to hearing yours too." As the sun dipped low over New Serenity, its golden light caught the spiral monument's crystal face. The names of the fallen shimmered across the garden, Concordium and human alike. No longer strangers, no longer myths. Just survivors, and now finally allies. The war was over, but the work was just beginning. In the weeks following the final battle, the scars of conflict were still visible everywhere: damaged cities, silent systems, empty colonies. Yet through the loss, something remarkable had taken root: unity. The alliance forged in desperation between humanity and the Concordium was now growing into something greater, something permanent. Across dozens of planets and orbital stations, reconstruction efforts moved quickly. What had once been divided fleets now operated as a single entity, joint patrols, shared technology, integrated command structures. Engineers from Earth worked side by side with Concordium tech specialists, rebuilding defense platforms with lessons learned in blood. The centerpiece of this rebirth stood in orbit above New Serenity, the Sentinel Array. The massive defense ring stretched across thousands of kilometers. Built using a hybrid of Concordium alloys and Earth's modular gravity field architecture, it was designed to act as a last line of defense, armed, shielded, and powered by what both species had to offer. Inside its control center, Commander Han reviewed final system calibrations. He had slept little in recent days, his mind still haunted by the knowledge that the void could return. They hadn't destroyed it, only pushed it back, but for now, they had time. And time was a precious thing. His eyes moved over the holographic display. A network of early warning sensors, weapon emplacements, escape corridors, every detail mattered. Every second of response time could save millions. "Commander," a voice called from behind him. He turned to see Dr. Kim entering, a datapad in her hand. She looked tired, more so than usual, but her eyes, like always, held clarity. "I finished analyzing the last energy spikes from the Singularity event," she said. "The Void's core bioship left behind traces." "Residuals?" Han asked. "No. Something more deliberate." She paused. "They left a signal, not a message, a pattern." "What kind of pattern?" "A pulse," she answered. "One we've seen before. They're learning faster than we thought." Even in retreat, they were still adapting. Han took the datapad and stared at the data in silence. "How long?" "Hard to say," Kim admitted. "Could be a decade, could be next year." Han handed the pad back. "Then we keep building." On the surface of New Serenity, peace felt tentative but real. In schools, Concordium children and human children now learned together. The language barrier was quickly falling away, helped by updated neural translation implants and shared media programs. Inside one of the newly opened classrooms, Mei stood at the front of the room, presenting a holographic model of the Takaruan monolith to a group of curious students. "This was one of the first things the humans left behind," she explained. "Not as a weapon, but as a warning system. They built it to detect the void. And they left it here. For us." A young human student raised his hand. "Why didn't they just stay?" Mei hesitated, then smiled gently. "Because sometimes the best way to protect something is to watch from a distance until the time is right." Outside, in the public plazas, statues were being unveiled, not of warriors or generals, but of the ordinary people who had saved lives, repaired ships, protected families. Concordium's stone sculptors and Earth's AI-driven printers worked together to preserve these faces in history. Zhu walked along the garden path with Yunji, both carrying tablets filled with report. He still struggled to believe that everything he'd once been mocked for, his obsession with the so-called myth of humans, had become accepted fact. "They're updating the archive entries today," Yunji said as they passed the Hall of Memory. "Your work will be listed as the catalyst for first contact recognition." Zhu laughed softly. "For a long time, they called me delusional. Now, they'll call you a founder." He shook his head. "I didn't discover humanity. I just refused to forget them." From the top of the promenade, they could see the city's central square where a celebration was underway, humans and Concordians sharing music, food, and stories. No walls, no segregation, just neighbors. Friends. At the edge of the square, Admiral Kang Ho stood beside Ambassador January. The two watched as a group of younglings from both species performed a cultural exchange dance, clumsy but enthusiastic. "Who would thought?" Kang Ho muttered, his artificial arm adjusting slightly with a mechanical whir. "That this is how it ends." January smiled, arms crossed. "It doesn't end. It just changes." A Concordium news crew approached them. The reporter asked a single question: "What do we call this new age?" January looked to Kang Ho, who simply nodded. "Call it what it is," January said. "Peace, hard-earned, long overdue." Later that evening, as dusk settled, Sue and Mei stood near the monument in the memorial garden. The names etched into the stone shimmered as the sky darkened. "We lost so much," Maya said quietly. "But we gained something too," Sue replied. "What?" He gestured toward the skyline, where Earth-designed transport vessels flew alongside Concordium skimmers. Each other, a soft wind moved through the garden. The planet felt still, whole. Above them, the Sentinel array rotated silently in orbit, its sensors wide open, scanning deep space. Waiting, watching, ready. It began with stories. Now, it would begin again with truth. In a bright lecture hall on the Concordium homeworld of Kyle, rows of students sat in rapt silence. Some were Concordium scaled, four-armed, blinking with blue-toned skin. Others were human hair tousled, eyes wide, pens tapping quietly against their tablet. Still others were from newer allied species who had joined the post-war initiative. The diversity would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Now, it was ordinary. At the front of the room stood Miai, now a senior researcher and co-chair of the Joint Historical Archive. She wore a long dark coat marked with the crest of both the United Earth Federation and the Concordium. Her voice was steady, her presence confident. Years ago, she had been just an assistant, quiet, overlooked, but the war had changed everything. Before contact was made, the stories of humans were considered myth, she said, tapping her console to project a holographic timeline in midair. Legends told to younglings about giants, gods, monsters. No one believed they were real. The hologram shifted to display a rotating image of the now famous artifact, the etched metal cylinder Ju had found decades earlier. Students leaned forward. But they were real, Miai continued. They had simply stepped away from the galaxy for a time. And when they returned, it wasn't to reclaim power, it was to stop what was coming for all. A hand went up a young Concordium boy, his voice polite but curious. Why didn't they stop the void sooner? Miai paused, then gave a gentle smile. Because even they weren't ready. The void doesn't just destroy, it adapts. Every battle teaches it something new. The humans didn't return as saviors. They came back because they knew if they didn't, none of us would survive. As the class ended and students filed out, Miai looked up at the massive glass window overlooking the campus courtyard. A human and Concordium flag flew side by side, rippling in the soft wind. Down below, children of both species played together beneath the statue of Ambassador January, hand extended in friendship, gaze fixed outward toward the stars. Later that evening, at the edge of the city, Ju stood in the Hall of Origins. The once forgotten researcher was now one of the most recognized scholars in the galaxy. His discovery had rewritten history, had saved entire civilizations, but he had never grown arrogant. He stood silently before the display case that held the artifact, its metal surface still glowing faintly under containment lights. Behind him, a voice spoke. She would have liked this play. Ju turned to find Admiral Kang-ho walking toward him, his prosthetic arm clicking softly with each step. The war had aged him. The lines on his face were deeper, but he looked lighter now, at peace. Ambassador January? Ju asked. Kang-ho nodded. She passed last month, quietly. No pain, from what I heard. Commander Han and Dr. Kim were with her. Ju looked back at the artifact. She gave us time. That's something we can never repay. No, Kang-ho agreed. But we can honor it. The two men stood in silence, surrounded by relics of both human and Concordium origin, proof of how two very different species had found common ground in their darkest hour. Outside, preparations were underway for the launch of the Unity Initiative, a new exploratory fleet co-commanded by Concordium and human officers. Their mission wasn't defense, but discovery, to return to the stars not in fear, but in hope, to rebuild not just ships and stations, but relationships across species, across systems. Yoonji stood on the launch platform, watching as the sleek vessels powered up. She had been promoted to Fleet Liaison Director, one of the youngest to ever hold the role. Beside her, Captain Suo ran final diagnostics with his human team. "You ready for this?" she asked him. Suo looked up, smiling faintly. "I've never been more ready." They boarded the lead ship, the Sol Cal 1, together. Its bridge shimmered with soft lights, blending Earth design with Concordium biometal texture. It felt strange and familiar all at once, just like everything else in this new age. As the countdown began, the crew strapped in. Through the forward viewport, the sky turned gold with evening light. The engines came online. The ship hummed to life, and then lift off. The fleet rose through the atmosphere, breaking into the stars like a whisper. People across the planet watched from rooftops and parks and balconies, their eyes following the streaks of light. The Unity Initiative had launched not as a gesture of power, but of purpose. A new beginning. Back in the Hall of Origins, Zhu stepped away from the artifact. Kang Ho remained behind, one hand on the display glass. "We used to tell stories about humans," Kang Ho said quietly. "But now, I think the better story is what we built together." Zhu nodded, the weight of memory and hope sitting gently on his shoulder. "Let's make sure that's the story we keep telling." Outside, in every city, and on every world that had survived, the future began to unfold, one conversation, one student, one mission at a time. The myths were gone. In their place, history, and in its shadow, the future walked forward together.